Well, hello, welcome. I'm glad that you're here with us today as we continue our chronological read through of the Bible. Today we're going to do four Psalms. We have four Psalms to read. The first is Psalm 5. It's a lament. Possibly it was written at the time of David's flight from Absalom. The psalm is structured into five units, five strophes. First, which is the first three verses, is a plea or a prayer to God for help that demonstrates the access of the righteous to God. The second, verses 4 to 6, is an appeal to God's holiness. It demonstrates how the wicked have no access to God. So the first one demonstrates how the righteous have access to God. The second strophe demonstrates how the wicked do not have access to God. Third strophe, verses 7 and 8, speak of David's confident hope of deliverance. The fourth, verses 9 and 10, is a prayer for the destruction of the wicked. And the fifth, verses 11 and 12, is a prayer for the salvation of the righteous. In this case, that they would receive God's protection and favor as a cover and a shield. Notice the contrast that David draws between himself and between those who don't fear the Lord, and the access that David enjoys even as the wicked are shut off. The psalmist emphasizes that those who do wrong cannot be in the presence of God, that God abhors them. Well, that sounds almost like it's going to be in conflict with God's love for all, not to mention conflict with the fact that all of us sin, all of us do what's not acceptable in the presence of God. How do we reconcile God's love for sinners and his hate of sin? Where do these two contradictory things meet? Well, they meet on the cross at Calvary. There, God's love for sinners and his hate of sin are reconciled, satisfied by the work of Jesus Christ, who paid the price for all sin, every last one. Now everyone is free to stand in the presence of God by faith. Our next psalm is Psalm 38. It's one of the seven penitential psalms. David pleads to the Lord to remember his gracious promises to him. He pleads to the Lord to forgive his sins and to deliver him from his enemies. Three burdens crush David: physical weakness and pain caused by sickness, spiritual anguish caused by his sin, and the betrayal of friends and family because David plans to place Solomon on the throne as God had directed. Even though David is heavily burdened and confesses that his sin makes him unworthy of deliverance, he still trusts that God will deliver him. Even though he knows he's incapable of delivering himself, he remains confident that God will. Psalm 41, our third psalm for today, is a psalm of intrigue and betrayal. The Apostle John quotes this psalm when he's giving the account of the Last Supper and Jesus' announcement of his betrayal. For King David, well, this most likely refers to the betrayal of his advisor Ahithophel, who went over to Absalom in his rebellion, and then he committed suicide when that rebellion fell apart. It could also refer to Joab's support of Adonijah over Solomon when it comes time to name the next king. But in either case, we see a close associate turning against his master, just as Judas did to Jesus. The psalm opens with David expressing confidence in his deliverance at the hand of the Lord because he has confessed his sins and he's entrusted his life to the Lord. There's a lesson there, isn't there? This is precisely the hope we have because of our Redeemer, whatever the situation we're presently in. There are those who pursue treachery against the Lord and his anointed, but God always prevails. Verse 13 is a doxology. It closes the psalm and it also closes the first book of the Psalms, a book that largely dealt with how David's kingship found its fulfillment in Christ. Our final psalm for today is Psalm 42. It's attributed to the sons of Korah. It's a group of Levites that David had put in charge of music at the temple. In a glimpse of God's mercy, these could very well be the sons of the Korah who led the rebellion against Moses in Numbers 16. Both Psalms 42 and 43 appear to work as a unit, written maybe written together and split apart later, or maybe added some additional verses or something like that as time went by. The Psalms are the lament of a Levite who's separated from the temple in Jerusalem. Notice how the opening verses that would be, I think, verses 1 through 4, express great longing for the temple. The refrain, verse 5, adjures the reader to put their hope in the Lord. The writer remembers then the Lord in verses 6 through 10, even as his enemies taunt him, and then finally returns to the refrain in verse 11. May God be with you and bless you. As always, I pray that you're learning and growing, not only from the time that we have together, but especially from the time that you're spending reading, doing these readings. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.